Stepping into the public bar gave me for the moment a comforting sense of normality. It was prosaically and familiarly like dozens of others. But although there was no one in that part, there was certainly something going on in the saloon bar round the corner. I heard heavy breathing. A cork left its bottle with a pop. A pause. Then a voice remarked, "Gin, blasted. The hell with gin." There followed a shattering crash. The voice gave a sozzled chuckle. "That's the mirror? What's good in mirrors, anyway?" Another cork popped. "Ah, damn gin again," complained the voice, offended. "The hell with gin." This time the bottle hit something soft, thudded to the floor, and lay there gurgling away its contents. "Hey," I called. "I want a drink." There was a silence. Then, "Who are you?" the voice inquired cautiously. "I'm from the hospital," I said. "I want a drink." "Don't remember your voice. Can you see?" "Yes," I told him. "Well, then, for God's sake, get over the bar dock and find me a bottle of whiskey." "I'm doctor enough for that," I said. I climbed across and went round the corner. A large-bellied, red-faced man with a greying walrus moustache stood there, clad only in trousers and a collarless shirt. He was fairly drunk. He seemed undecided whether to open the bottle he held in his hand or to use it as a weapon. "If you're not a doctor, what are you?" he demanded suspiciously. "I was a patient, but I need a drink as much as any doctor," I said. That's gin again you've got there," I added. "Oh, is it? Bloody gin," he said, and slung it away. It went through the window with a lively crash. "Give me that corkscrew," I told him. I took down a bottle of whiskey from the shelf, opened it, and handed it to him with a glass. For myself, I chose a stiff brandy with very little soda, and then another. After that, my hand wasn't shaking so much. I looked at my companion. He was taking his whiskey neat, out of the bottle. "You'll get drunk," I said. He paused and turned his head towards me. I could have sworn that his eyes really saw me. "Get drunk? Damn it, I am drunk," he said scornfully. He was so perfectly right that I didn't comment. He brooded a moment before he announced, "Gotta get drunker. Gotta get much drunker." He leaned closer. "You know what? I'm blind. That's what I am. Blind as a bat. Everybody just blind as a bat. Except you. Why aren't you blind as a bat?" "I don't know," I told him. "It's that bloody comet. That's what's done it. Green shooting stars, and now everybody's blind as a bat. You see green shooting stars?" "No," I admitted. "There you are. Proves it. You didn't see 'em. You aren't blind. Everybody else saw 'em." He waved an expressive arm. "All's blind as bats. Bloody comets, I say." I poured myself a third brandy, wondering whether there might not be something in what he was saying. "Everyone blind?" I repeated. "That's it. All of them. Probably everyone in the world except you," he added as an afterthought. "How do you know?" I asked. "It's easy. Listen," he said. We stood side by side, leaning on the bar of the dingy pub, and listened. There was nothing to be heard. Nothing but the rustle of a dirty newspaper blown down the empty street. Such a quietness held everything as cannot have been known in those parts for 1,000 years and more. "See what I mean? It's obvious," said the man. "Yes," I said slowly. "Yes, I see what you mean." I decided that I must get along. I did not know where to, but I must find out more about what was happening. "Are you the landlord?" I asked him. "What if I am?" he demanded defensively. Only that I've got to pay someone for 3 double brandies.
Oh, forget it.
But look here.
Forget it, I tell you. Do you know why? Because what's the good of money to a dead man? And that's what I am. As good as. It's just a few more drinks.
He looked a pretty robust specimen for his age, and I said so.
What's good of living blind as a bat?
He demanded aggressively.
That's what my wife said. And she was right, only she's more guts than I have. When she found us the kids was blind too, what did she do? Took him into our bed with her and turned on the gas. That's what she done. And I hadn't the guts to stick with them. She's got pluck, my wife, more than I have. But I will have soon. I'm going back up there soon when I'm drunk enough.
What was there to say? What I did say served no purpose save to spoil his temper. In the end, he groped his way to the stairs and disappeared up them, bottle in hand. I didn't try to stop him or follow him. I watched him go. Then I knocked back the last of my brandy and went out into the silent street. Chapter 2. The Coming of the Triffids. This is a personal record. It involves a great deal that has vanished forever, but I can't tell it in any other way than by using the words we used to use for those vanished things, so they have to stand. But even to make the setting intelligible, I find that I shall have to go back farther than the point at which I started. When I was a child, we lived, my father, my mother and myself, in a southern suburb of London. We had a small house which my father supported by conscientious daily attendance at his desk in the Inland Revenue Department, and a small garden at which he worked rather harder during the summer. There was not a lot to distinguish us from the 10 or 12 million other people who used to live in and around London in those days. My father was one of those persons who could add a column of figures, even of the ridiculous coinage then in use locally, with a flick of the eye, so that it was natural for him to have in mind that I should become an accountant. As a result, my inability to make any column of figures reach the same total twice caused me to be something of a mystery as well as a disappointment to him. Still, there it was, just one of those things. And each of a succession of teachers who tried to show me that mathematical answers were derived logically, and not through some form of esoteric inspiration, was forced to give up with the assurance that I had no head for figures. My father would read my school reports with a gloom which in other respects they scarcely warranted. His mind worked, I think, this way. No head for figures equals no idea of finance equals no money. I really don't know what we shall do with you. What do you want to do? He would ask. And until I was 13 or 14, I would shake my head, conscious of my sad inadequacy, and admit that I did not know. My father would then shake his head. For him the world was divided sharply into desk men who worked with their brains, and non-desk men who didn't, and got dirty. How he contrived to maintain this view, which was already a century or so out of date, I do not know, but it pervaded my early years to such an extent that I was late in perceiving that a weakness in figures did not, of necessity, condemn me to the life of a street sweeper or a scullion. It did not occur to me that the subject which interested me most could lead to a career, and my father failed either to notice, or, if he did, to care, that reports on my biology were consistently good. It was the appearance of the Triffids which really decided the matter for us. Indeed, they did a lot more than that for me. They provided me with a job, and comfortably supported me. They also, on several occasions, almost took my life. On the other hand, I have to admit that they preserved it too, for it was a Triffid sting that had landed me in hospital on the critical occasion of the comet debris. In the books there is quite a lot of loose speculation on the sudden occurrence of the Triffids. Most of it is nonsense. Certainly they were not spontaneously generated, as many simple souls believed. Nor did most people endorse the theory that they were a kind of sample visitation, harbingers of worse to come if the world did not mend its ways and behave its troublesome self. Nor did their seeds float to us through space as specimens of the horrid forms life might assume upon other, less favoured worlds. At least, I am satisfied that they did not. I learned more about it than most people because Triffids were my job, and the firm I worked for was intimately, if not very gracefully, concerned in their public appearance. Nevertheless, their true origin still remains obscure. My own belief, for what it is worth, is that they were the outcome of a series of ingenious biological meddlings, and very likely accidental at that. Had they been evolved anywhere but in the region they were, we should doubtless have had a well-documented ancestry for them. As it was, no authoritative statement was ever published by those who must have been best qualified to know. The reason for this lay, no doubt, in the curious political conditions then prevailing. The world we lived in then was wide, and most of it was open to us with little trouble. Roads, railways, and shipping lines laced it, ready to carry one thousands of miles safely and in comfort. If we wanted to travel more swiftly still, and could afford it, we travelled by aeroplane. There was no need for anyone to take weapons or even precautions in those days. You could go just as you were to wherever you wished, with nothing to hinder you, other than a lot of forms and regulations. A world so tamed sounds utopian now. Nevertheless, it was so over 5/6 of the globe, though the remaining sixth was something different again. It must be difficult for young people who never knew it to envisage a world like that. Perhaps it sounds like a golden age, though it wasn't quite that to those who lived in it. Or they may think that an earth ordered and cultivated almost all over sounds dull, but it wasn't that either. It was rather an exciting place, for a biologist anyway. Every year we were pushing the northern limit of growth for food plants a little farther back. New fields were growing quick crops on what had historically been simply tundra or barren land. Every season, too, stretches of desert, both old and recent, were reclaimed and made to grow grass or food. For food was then our most pressing problem, and the progress of the regeneration schemes and the advance of the cultivation lines on the maps was followed with almost as much attention as an earlier generation had paid to battlefronts. Such a swerve of interest from swords to ploughshares was undoubtedly a social improvement, but at the same time it was a mistake for the optimistic to claim it as showing a change in the human spirit. The human spirit continued much as before, 95% of it wanting to live in peace, and the other 5% considering its chances if it should risk starting anything. It was chiefly because no one's chances looked too good that the lull continued. Meanwhile, with something like 25 million new mouths bawling for food every year, the supply problem became steadily worse, and after years of ineffective propaganda, a couple of atrocious harvests had at last made the people aware of its urgency. The factor which had caused the militant 5% to relax a while from fomenting discord was the satellites. Sustained research in rocketry had at last succeeded in attaining one of its objectives. It had sent up a missile which stayed up. It was in fact possible to fire a rocket far enough up for it to fall into an orbit round the Earth. Once there, it would continue to circle like a tiny moon, quite inactive and innocuous, until the pressure on a button should give it the impulse to drop back, with devastating effect. Great as was the public concern which followed the triumphant announcement of the first nation to establish a satellite weapon satisfactorily, a still greater concern was felt over the failure of others to make any announcement at all, even when they were known to have had similar successes. It was by no means pleasant to realise that there was an unknown number of menaces up there over your head, quietly circling and circling until someone should arrange for them to drop, and that there was nothing to be done about them. Still, life has to go on, and novelty is a wonderfully short-lived thing. One became used to the idea, perforce. From time to time there would be a panicky flare-up of expostulation, when reports circulated that as well as satellites with atomic heads, there were others with such things as crop diseases, cattle diseases, radioactive dusts, viruses, and infections not only of familiar kinds, but brand new sorts recently thought up in laboratories, all floating around up there. Whether such uncertain and potentially backfiring weapons had actually been placed is hard to say. But then, the limits of folly itself, particularly of folly with fear on its heels, are not easy to define. A virulent organism, unstable enough to become harmless in the course of a few days, and who is to say that such could not be bred, could be considered to have strategic uses if dropped in suitable spots. At least the United States government took the suggestion seriously enough to deny emphatically that it controlled any satellites designed to conduct biological warfare directly upon human beings. One or two minor nations, whom no one suspected of controlling any satellites at all, hastened to make similar declarations. Other and major powers did not. In the face of this ominous reticence, the public began demanding to know why the United States had neglected to prepare for a form of warfare which others were ready to use, and just what did directly mean anyway. At this point, all parties tacitly gave up denying or confirming anything about satellites, and an intensified effort was made to divert the public interest to the no less important but far less acrimonious matter of food scarcity. The laws of supply and demand should have enabled the more enterprising to organise commodity monopolies, but the world at large had become antagonistic to declared monopolies. However, the laced company system really worked very smoothly without anything so imputable as articles of federation. The general public heard scarcely anything of such little difficulties within the pattern as had to be untangled from time to time. Hardly anyone heard of even the existence of Umberto Cristoforo Palanguez, for instance. I only heard of him myself years later in the course of my work. Umberto was of assorted Latin descent, and something South American by nationality. His first appearance as a possibly disruptive spanner in the neat machinery of the edible oil interests occurred when he walked into the offices of the Arctic and European Fish Oil Company and produced a bottle of pale pink oil in which he proposed to interest them. Arctic and European displayed no eagerness. The trade was pretty well tied up. However, they did in the course of time get around to analysing the sample he had left with them. The first thing they discovered about it was that it was not a fish oil anyway. It was vegetable, though they could not identify the source. The second revelation was that it made most of their best fish oils look like greasebox fillers. Alarmed, they sent out what remained of the sample for intensive study, and put round hurried inquiries to know if Mr. Palanguez had made other approaches. When Umberto called again, the managing director received him with flattering attention. "That is a very remarkable oil you brought us, Mr. Palanguez," he said. Umberto nodded his sleek, dark head. He was well aware of the fact. "I have never seen anything quite like it," the managing director admitted. Umberto nodded again. "No?" he said politely. Then, seemingly as an afterthought, he added, "But I think you will, senor. A very great deal of it." He appeared to ponder. "It will, I think, come on in market maybe 7, maybe 8 years from now." He smiled. The managing director thought that unlikely. He said with a frank air, "It is better than our fish oils." "So I am told, senor," agreed Umberto. "You are proposing to market it yourself, Mr. Palanguez?" Umberto smiled again. "Would I be showing it to you if I did?" "We might reinforce one of our own oils synthetically," observed the managing director reflectively. "With some of the vitamins, but it would be costly to synthesize all of them, even if you could," Umberto said gently. "Besides," he added, "I am told that this oil will easily undersell your best fish oils anyway." Said the managing director. "Well, I suppose you have a proposition, Mr. Palanguez. Shall we come to it?" Umberto explained. "There are 2 ways of dealing with such an unfortunate matter. The usual one is to prevent it happening, or at least to delay it until the capital sunk in present equipment has been paid off. That is, of course, the desirable way." The managing director nodded. He knew plenty about that. "But this time I am so sorry for you because, you see, it is not possible." The managing director had his doubts. His inclination was to say, "You'd be surprised," but he resisted it, and contented himself with a non-committal, "Oh?" "The other way," suggested Umberto, "is to produce the thing yourself before the trouble starts." "Ah," said the managing director. "I think," Umberto told him, "I think that I might be able to supply you with seeds of this plant in maybe 6 months' time. If you were to plant then, you could begin production of oil in 5 years, or it might be 6 for full yield." "Just nicely in time, in fact," observed the managing director. Umberto nodded. "The other way would be simpler," remarked the managing director. "If it were possible at all," Umberto agreed. "But unfortunately your competitors are not approachable or suppressible." He made the statement with a confidence which caused the managing director to study him thoughtfully for some moments. "I see," he said at last. "I wonder... you don't happen to be a Soviet citizen, Mr. Palanguez?" "No," said Umberto. "On the whole, my life has been lucky, but I have very, varied connections. That brings us to considering the other sixth of the world, that part which one could not visit with such facility as the rest. Indeed, permits to visit the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics were almost unobtainable, and the movements of those who did achieve them were strictly circumscribed. It had deliberately organized itself into a land of mystery. Little of what went on behind the veiling secrecy, which was almost pathological in the region, was known to the rest of the world. What was usually suspect. Yet behind the curious propaganda which distributed the laughable while concealing all likely to be of the least importance, achievements undoubtedly went on in many fields. One was biology. Russia, who shared with the rest of the world the problem of increasing food supplies, was known to have been intensively concerned with attempts to reclaim desert, steppe, and the northern tundra. In the days when information was still exchanged, she had reported some successes. Later, however, a cleavage of methods and views had caused biology there, under a man called Lysenko, to take a different course. It too then succumbed to the endemic secrecy. The lines it had taken were unknown and thought to be unsound, but it was anybody's guess whether very successful, very silly, or very queer things were happening there, if not all three at once. "Sunflowers," said the managing director, speaking absent-mindedly out of his own reflections. "I happen to know that they were having another shot at improving the yield of sunflower seed oil, but it isn't that." "No," agreed Umberto. "It is not that." The managing director doodled. "Seeds, you said. Do you mean that it is some new species? Because if it is merely some improved strain more easily processed, I understand that it is a new species, something quite new." "Then you haven't actually seen it yourself. It may in fact be some modified kind of sunflower." "I have seen a picture, senor. I do not say there is no sunflower there at all. I do not say there is no turnip there. I do not say there is no nettle or even no orchid there. But I do say that if they were all fathers to it, they would none of them know their child. I do not think it would please them greatly either." "I see. Now, what was the figure you had in mind for getting us the seeds of this thing?" Umberto named a sum which stopped the managing director's doodling quite abruptly. It made him take off his glasses to regard the speaker more closely. Umberto was unabashed. "Consider, senor," he said, ticking off points on his fingers. "It is difficult, and it is dangerous, very dangerous. I do not fear, but I do not go to danger to amuse myself, There is another man, a Russian. I shall have to bring him away, and he must be paid well. There will be others that he must pay first. Also, I must buy an aeroplane, a jet aeroplane, very fast. All these things cost money. And I tell you, it is not easy. You must have seeds that are good. Many of the seeds of this plant are infertile. To make sure, I have to bring you seeds that have been sorted. They are valuable. And in Russia, everything is a state secret and guarded. Certainly, it will not be easy." "I believe that, but all the same—" "Is it so much, senor? What will you say in a few years when these Russians are selling their oil all over the world and your company is finished?" "It will need thinking over, Mr. Palangwith." "But of course, senor," Umberto agreed with a smile. "I can wait a little while, but I'm afraid I cannot reduce my price." Nor did he. The discoverer and the inventor are the bane of business. A little sand in the works is comparatively a mere nothing. You just replace the damaged parts and go on. But the appearance of a new process, a new substance, when you are all organized and ticking nicely, is the very devil. Sometimes it is worse than that. It just cannot be allowed to occur. Too much is at stake. If you can't use legal methods, you must try others. For Umberto had understated the case. It was not simply that the competition of a cheap new oil would send Arctic and European and their associates out of business. The effects would be widespread. It might not be fatal to the groundnut, the olive, the whale, and a number of other oil industries, but it would be a nasty knock. Moreover, there would be violent repercussions in dependent industries, in margarine, soap, and 100 more products from face creams to house paints and beyond. Indeed, once a few of the more influential concerns had grasped the quality of the menace, Umberto's terms came to seem almost modest. He got his agreement, for his samples were convincing, if the rest was somewhat vague. In point of fact, It cost those interested quite a lot less than they had undertaken to pay, for after Umberto went off with his aeroplane and his advance, he was never seen again. But that is not to say that he was altogether unheard of. Some years later, an indeterminate individual giving simply the name Fedor turned up at the offices of Arctic and European Oils. They had dropped fish from both their title and activities then. He was, he said, a Russian. He would like, he said, some money if the kind capitalists would be good enough to spare some. His story was that he had been employed in the first experimental Triffids station in the district of Elovsk in Kamchatka. It was a forlorn place, and he greatly disliked it. His desire to get away had caused him to listen to a suggestion from another worker there, to be specific, one Tovarish Nikolai Alexandrovich Baltinov, and the suggestion had been backed up by several thousand roubles. It did not require a great deal of earning. He had simply to remove a box of sorted fertile Triffid seeds from its rack and substitute a similar box of infertile seeds. The purloined box was to be left at a certain place at a certain time. There was practically no risk. It might be years before the substitution was discovered. A further requirement, however, was a little more tricky. He was to see that a pattern of lights was laid out on a large field a mile or two from the plantation. He was to be there himself on a certain night. He would hear an aeroplane flying directly above. He would switch on the lights. The plane would land. The best thing he could do then would be to get away from the neighbourhood as soon as possible, before anyone should arrive to investigate. For these services he would receive not only the comfortable wad of roubles, but if he should succeed in leaving Russia, he would find more money waiting for him at the offices of Arctic and European in England. By his account, the operation had gone entirely to plan. Fedor had not waited once the plane was down. He had switched off the lights and beat it. The plane had stopped only a short time, perhaps not 10 minutes, before it took off again. From the sound of the jets, he judged that it was climbing steeply as it went. A minute or so after the noise had died away, he heard the sound of engines again. Some more planes went over headed east, after the other. There might have been 2 or more, he could not tell, but they were travelling very fast, with their jets shrieking. The next day, Comrade Baltinov was missing. There had been a lot of trouble, but in the end it was decided that Baltinov must have been working alone, so it had all passed off safely for Fedor. He had cautiously waited for a year before he made a move. It had cost him almost the last of his roubles by the time he had bought his way through the final obstacles. Then he had had to take various jobs to live, so that he had spent a long time in reaching England. But now he had. Could he have some money, please? Something had been heard about Elovsk by that time, and the date he gave for the plane landing was within probability, so they gave him some money. They also gave him a job and told him to keep his mouth shut. For it was clear that though Umberto had not personally delivered the goods, he had at least saved the situation by broadcasting them. Arctic European had not at first connected the appearance of the Triffids with Umberto, and the police of several countries went on keeping an eye open for him on their behalf. It was not until some investigator produced a specimen of Triffid oil for their inspection that they realized that it corresponded exactly with the sample Umberto had shown them, and that it was the seeds of the Triffid he had set out to bring. What happened to Umberto himself will never be definitely known. It is my guess that over the Pacific Ocean, somewhere high up in the stratosphere, he and Comrade Baltinov found themselves attacked by the planes that Fedor had heard in pursuit. It may be that the first they knew of it was when cannon shells from Russian fighters started to break up their craft. And I think, too, that one of those shells blew to pieces a certain 12-inch cube of plywood, the receptacle like a small tea chest in which, according to Fedor, the seeds were packed. Perhaps Umberto's plane exploded, perhaps it just fell to pieces. Whichever it was, I'm sure that when the fragments began their long, long fall towards the sea, they left behind them something which looked at first like a white vapour. It was not vapour. It was a cloud of seeds, floating, so infinitely light they were, even in the rarefied air. Millions of gossamer-slung Triffid seeds, free now to drift wherever the winds of the world should take them. It might be weeks, perhaps months, before they would sink to earth at last, many of them thousands of miles from their starting place. That is, I repeat, conjecture, but I cannot see a more probable way in which that plant, intended to be kept secret, could come quite suddenly to be found in almost every part of the world.